Alrighty, and welcome back to the channel, everyone. Today I'm going to be bringing you the big ol' update video, hence the hat and the video camera here. So this is going to be regarding update 1.0.2. So there was a lot that went down on this update, a lot, and it was a huge, I guess, undertaking for the developers and a big decision on their part in order to bring forth this update to you all. So one of the biggest differences that is going to be is now every single one of these characters is typed. So they all have either magical or physical offensive capabilities as well as defensive capabilities, and that does reflect in their stats. Now you could check here, they now have a physical magical defense, and this applies to enemies as well. So this concept covers a whole lot of different aspects of the campaign, and so I'm just going to go through and briefly talk a little bit onto them, and not so much on exactly how or what they play as. And so we're just going to go ahead and use Demon Warden as an example. So now if you go in, it'll show these different kinds of icons here at the bottom, and it's basically the Thunderbolt is for attacking, and then the shield is for defensive. So it's recommending that you bring in physical attacking characters with physical capabilities. So in the sorting option, there now is a damage type, and so you could sort by that, and basically the characters that are closest on top is going to be the most recommended. So it's going to be these 9 characters right here are going to be the most recommended characters for this kind of fight. And then further on, these characters following up until right here, Alexa, they have physical capabilities and magical defensive capabilities. However, the physical attack is still a little bit more important than physical defense, where the physical defense is basically more or less a cherry on top. And so these kinds of changes are affecting all sorts of aspects of gameplay. And so the role challenges and stuff, I need to go back and go through and make more guides for that, just because it's likely going to be different. In my playtesting on this test account right here, it was a little bit more difficult because the characters themselves actually have type or typeless benefits or disadvantages for some of these role challenges. That actually makes it harder. And this aspect of the type advantages and such, it goes through every single one of the campaigns. And so the first couple of worlds, the bosses and such aren't as affected as types, and so you don't have to worry about it as often. But the further and further you go, the greater and greater. I want to say it's like 0% increases, 20% increases, 40% increases, and like 60 to 80% for damage reductions. So it's basically to the point where if you aren't bringing a physical attacking capability for Demon Warden, you're basically going to be doing very, very little damage towards the end of these chapters. And so that's greatly changing gameplay for how you approach bosses and such. And it's also for when you're doing raid nodes and such. It hasn't changed as much, but I definitely feel that physical characters got the short end of the stick, because most of the enemies within the game, they're either typeless or neutral enemies for most normal mobs, or they're physical resistant. And so magic characters remain fairly strong in that aspect, and I don't know how I feel about that. So there was a big nerf. I went and checked every single one of the characters in the target dummy and did a before and after screenshot before this update, and I was actually surprised. There was a lot of changes going on there. So that was the biggest thing to talk about, and it is the thing I know a lot of people aren't happy with. A lot of people are like, okay, maybe we'll see what'll happen. There's a lot of people who are just downright disappointed, or they don't care for this update. And so it's very mixed feelings with it. I've been here for quite some time now, about 8 or so months, 9 months now, and so I'm curious to see where all this will go. It has made combat a little bit difficult, I think, for newer players, but I think that's a good in the sense that for the first maybe 3 worlds, you can't just turn on 4 times and do auto AFK. You have to do a little bit more thinking, a little bit more strategy, rather than just simply bringing in your strongest characters. And so I could talk a lot more about that, but for now, we're just going to just hop into one of these, and so I could show you something else that has changed. You now have the ability to go into your roster. This is actually a bad one to showcase. We're going to go ahead and do this one instead. And so you have the ability to save different sorts of squads within these types of tabs here. So maybe this one will have 5. Okay, there we go. And so when you go in, you could choose which of these formations you want to save into which tabs, and then you could click save, and then you could change however you want to do that. And this is very, very useful, and I'm so glad they did 10 tabs, because oftentimes in games when they first introduce these types of mechanics, it's generally you'll have 3 or maybe 5 when you actually need at least 7, and so having 10 is huge. I am so grateful for that. So that means for alliances, most of the time when you're doing raids, you're going to have a formation for when you're doing the mech boss, you're going to have a very specific setup for him. And then for the orc and the worm queen, you could have specific setups for them, as well as for the treant. And so you could easily set up formations now for whichever boss you're currently farming. You could do it as well as if you're doing a story campaign. You need to say you're about like T9, T10. You need to be farming whatever Lich King, as well as maybe zombie. You could easily set up squads, and then it's a matter of you enter into a new stage and you click the squad that you want, and then you click the tab, and then you post it into here, and then you could go on straight from there. So that's very nice that they were able to do that. A couple more things they added. They apparently changed the intelligence for the actual AI mechanics. So when your characters are in squads and they are inside of the battles themselves, and there is a red AoE, they're supposed to be a little bit more smart about avoiding it. So I haven't personally noticed anything different. I know a couple of people have said so as well, but they've also said the opposite, where they have noticed. It's kind of minor in my opinion. And so I didn't really see a whole lot there. They changed a whole bunch of the damage numbers as well. So when you're in combats with 50 million characters, I'm just going to go ahead and click in here. It's less cluttered, and I know I've been pushing suggestions for that for a while now, and so it's good to see that finally here. It makes seeing everything so much easier. I could actually tell where the bosses are, where my squads are when I'm going in here, because before it was just a whole bunch of flashing auras and numbers and stuff. And so yeah. But another thing is, if you look at underneath every single one of the characters, it actually says for your characters, it says what their damage type is. So for example, King of Games here is a magical attacker, and then Foxy is a physical attacker. And then for the actual dummy here, you could see underneath him, for enemies, it'll show what type of defense they are, so whether or not they're physical or magical defense. So that's what you see on the enemy side, and so that's very nice to be able to see that. So I'm gonna go ahead and quit out of this. Let's see, what else did they change and add? So the World 5 zombie, he actually has a new look, and I haven't actually gone in and tested it. It looked a little bit wonky when I was looking at the pre-images they had been doing. So we're just going to go ahead and hop in. I'm just going to auto select, go in at 1x speed so I don't just instantly delete this. I'm just going to kite my characters around a little bit. So yeah, he's very interesting now. I like the Kraken rework. It looked very, very good for the Kraken. I did like the treant was a little bit more cartoonish, where I think I had preferred its previous one, and then the orc one was the same thing. I like the orc update, and so looking at this actually looks very, very clean. I do like the way it looks. The towers are now much more noticeable. The sides, the arena itself is gorgeous. This definitely does look like some sort of like cage arena match going on here. So the zombie himself, he actually looks a little bit better. I didn't like his tool icon for the actual world, but actually going in and looking at him, I think he looks alright. So I'm just going to go ahead and delete this boss real quick here. So yeah, I do like that. That was a nice little subtle change they did. Another one is they added backgrounds to each of the world selections. So you see back here, I don't know if this was like in the last update or in the update before, but every single world now has a sort of background to each of the worlds, and it looks very, very beautiful to each of them. And then same thing with these, it's not so much. I think this is the same thing. So that was very nice. Let's see, what else did they do? They changed the typings for all sorts of enemies and such. So let's see, for example, you go in here and their passives, instead of it just being a straight attack boost, it now actually specifies the type. So the passives increase physical damage or magical damage, and so that's been a huge thing, because the compositions that we the players have been using for well over a year for some of the oldest players have now changed. And so the same comps and the same formations that we have learned to use and to basically use in every content and every situation, we've gotten accustomed and comfortable with these kinds of team compositions, but it now is changed. So it's like Pika Pika, for example, is magical attack up, and so we now have to think a little bit more differently on how we're going to approach these things. And there's a whole skew of characters that were affected by this, so I'm not going to really talk about them a whole lot. What I am going to talk about is the RedDragon here. So you can see I had no investment in my RedDragon whatsoever compared to some of my other characters, which have been 6-star for months. They've been working on getting them maxed, and they have some power stones and such applied there. But the RedDragon got a huge rework. She's kind of like a magical attacker now in the medium DPS class, so it's a very weird spot, but her damages and her abilities were, almost all of them were tweaked and reworked. Jump, for example, is a huge DPS output for her, and then a couple changes to make things a little bit more magical here, like Dragon's Blood is a new buff I need to unlock and figure out what that does. But yeah, I was kind of surprised with her. She can actually output a little bit more DPS. On my other account with level 2 and level 3 abilities, she was actually my 6th or 7th highest DPS output versus the Mimic with no stones on it whatsoever, on her whatsoever. And so I'm curious to see what she'll be once I actually have a couple more levels into her, how competitive she'll be. But she definitely will be rising in the tier list, because I know she has been the meme character for quite some time, in the sense that there's just so much you could talk about with how memeable she was in the past. So yeah, there was a couple changes to the actual, let's see, the weapons quest change, the campaign missions and such. A couple of them have been made easier. A couple of them have made the teams actually more viable, because before you'd be in a healer quest with characters that can't do any damage, and so it's just really long and super annoying in order to do them. They've added a couple of characters to the campaign in World 2 specifically, and they've also changed a couple of the enemies and the mechanics they do. So, and they've also removed some of the enemies to make the earlier stages a little bit more easier. And so they've also added guaranteed drops to these earlier stages. So you can see in the World 1, instead of it being normal materials, it's now just straight T1 gear all the way up until you reach this boss here. And so when I go in and I click on them, they actually have 2 different rewards dropping for them. Now, up until the World 3 bosses, that's when they finally stop, and the gear drops are no longer guaranteed, or with an increased chance to drop. So that's going to be huge for new players, because I remember when I first started, it took me about, I think it was 5 days in order to reach and defeat Titan Golem. And even a couple of months ago, I went and tested on a couple of alt accounts, and I could do it well within a day. And so now with this change, man, people are going to be flying into World 4 easily in less than a day, even if they don't know what they're doing. So I'm curious to see how that'll work, because if you do it like that, you only have 4 campaigns or 4 worlds left in order to have anything, and they'll just be so used to just hitting 4 times an auto through there. I'm curious to see how new players will react into actually entering a little bit more difficult content. So another thing that's been changed, and this has a PSA in it because it's kind of bugged. You have this free recruit scroll that has been pushed all the way out here to the side. So for a lot of people, you won't see it, and for a couple of accounts, I know it's in the far right, but you want to make sure that you're going in and checking here until the devs go in and do a fix in order to do that. And that was another thing here. You get this new type of currency here to get rare scrolls, and it's only rare characters. And so that was another huge change that they did, was all of the characters now have an innate rarity in their, I guess, as far as for recruiting purposes. And so let's see which one will show it. So here now, it has a higher chance of getting a rare guild member, and it is an increased chance of getting shards for them. So I kind of like that change, because before it was just every character was the same technically rarity, but the amount of shards you could get for them was a little bit lower. So it does mean that you will be getting more common characters, and so that'll allow you to progress them faster. And then when you do get a rare character pool, you'll get a lot more shards to compensate for that. And so they'll be progressing at about the same. I'm not exactly sure how that'll work as far as the analytics and such, basically how team compositions will be formed for new players. Because I know it was roughly, I'd done some math, it was roughly within a month, players should have about 30 of the 40 characters unlocked, and then if they buy 2 of the 10 times scrolls, then it should be closer to 35 of those characters within a month. And so I'm curious to see how that'll change, whether or not they'll be getting more characters or a wider variety of characters. And yeah, so what else changed? There was a couple of things that were not in the patch notes. So for example, if you go into the ranks, they now changed the variety. I guess they opened the spread, because before it used to be like bronze was like 1,000 to 2,000 or something like that, and wood was like 2,000 to 5,000 or something like that. And so what they did was, in anticipation for having a more amount of people within the game, they've gone ahead and started doing some prep work in order to change the tiers. And this is actually a suggestion I put in that they do for Daily Dungeon instead. And so I was kind of surprised to see it here first in PvP, where it's kind of strange, because I don't think there is more than 1,500 players actively doing Daily Dungeon a day. Even I'll need to check now with the newest updates, so don't quote me on that, but it would swing when I would check. It would swing anywhere from 500 to 1,100 players doing Daily Dungeon every day, and so it seemed to be about an average of 800 and 900 a day. It was been the average for a couple of months now. So what else changed? The challenges themselves. So we have light armor DPS is coming up, we have medium armor DPS is coming up, and we also have support challenge coming up as well. Or hold on, maybe I'm reading that wrong. So we have tank support coming up as well as light DPS. There we go. So what has happened is, on some days there are 3 role challenges that can be done now, rather than the 2 that it has been for quite some time. So I think it's 3, 2, 3, 2, 3, 2, and then on Sunday it's every single one of them. So I'm not exactly sure which one they put into the rotations. I imagine it is light DPS, medium armor DPS, and ranged DPS challenges are the 3 that have the 3 challenges per week, just because these are more of the, not necessarily harder challenges, but the higher requirements in order to complete them. So that'll help you to catch up with those characters more so than the tank and the support and the magic DPS, which should be your first ones to complete. Technically even the light DPS ones if you have done that. So that was pretty much about it. There was a bunch of minor changes and updates to tooltips, skill effects, buffs, and debuffs, but I've been going over the past couple days and been changing a whole bunch of them within my guides itself. This update was huge. It's made pretty much every single one of my other videos more or less obsolete, and so I'm looking forward to going and creating more content for everyone here. At the same time, I'm also sad that all of the videos and stuff in my folders are, I'm uncertain whether or not I will be portraying them anymore, just because I have a good 110 videos, I think, already prepped and ready. I just have been lazy and lacking motivation in order to update them and edit them and then upload them onto YouTube. So that was about 40 gigs of videos. I am uncertain what their fate shall be, but anyways, it was fun bringing this video to you all, and I look forward to seeing you all in my next one.